Greetings, friends. Well, are you interested in freedom? I hope that you are praying about the situation that we have with this election year. Now, freedom is at stake. There is an evil force that is trying to take over our country. There are people that do not care about truth. They do not care about justice. They care about themselves. They are in positions of authority for themselves and to benefit personally and benefit their families, and that power that they get when they get in influential positions messes them up. Now, thankfully, President Donald Trump already had fame. He already had money. He wasn't as easily corrupted as most politicians are. Now, not every politician is corrupted, but many of them are, and they get that way easily by special interest groups and lobbyists and people that try to convince them a certain way, and money is paid, and people donating to campaigns and expecting things in return, and it lends itself to fraud. It lends itself to bribery. Now, if you are aware of a lot of what happens outside of America in other countries, you know that bribery is commonplace. It's almost expected in some countries to pay people a certain amount or else they won't do you a favor or help you out. We are about to get in this way in this country if we're not careful, because there's already been corruption. There's always been some corruption, but there's corruption that is to a level that you've never seen before. This election, there was corruption to a level you've never seen before, and we know it. And today is the day that the safe harbor deadline is in place. Now, that is when the electors are supposed to be chosen from the votes in each state. Now, some people may misunderstand that popular vote does come into play, but it's through the Electoral College that voting actually is finalized, and it gives representation to each state. Now, popular votes in each state determine the winners and the electors chosen, but the popular vote in the country is not what determines, because the states have a number of electors based on their population, and they are given the chance to go and they're given the responsibility to go and to vote according to how the popular vote went in their state. Well, there's all sorts of things going on. There's all sorts of processes that go on. The 8th of December is the day that states have to have figured out all of the discrepancies and to actually certify a vote with the electors represented. And then there's 6 more days that are allowed until the 14th, when these certificates have to be ready so that the electors actually cast their vote that day. There's paperwork involved. There's other stuff that's part of tradition, legalities, things that you can get into if you want. Most of the time we don't pay attention to a lot of this, but this year there's a lot more attention on it because of the discrepancies in voting. Now, I wanted to talk about this today because what we have in this case is a real fraud. I mean, I don't know what may happen today, at the end of the day, with what states will do, how they may or may not choose electors, and what may happen then, and what will happen on the 14th if someone would change a vote, if electors would be changed by then because of things that are found out, or if the 23rd, when the mail has to be received in the various places, is done. I don't know if that'll be what happens. What will happen if legality, if the courts get involved more, the Supreme Court get involved, it could happen that things change. But there are these deadlines in place. There's the 8th, which is the big deadline that's today. There's the 14th, which is the actual voting. There is the 23rd, when it has to arrive at the places it's supposed to in Congress. There's the joint session of Congress on January 6th, and there's the vote in Georgia for the 2 senators in the runoffs on January 5th. Early voting starting the 14th of December, and the actual vote day on the 5th of January. So there'll be a lot of news coming up early in the year, 5th and 6th. Now there's some things that can happen with disputing even on the 6th in the joint session of Congress. Vice President Pence will oversee that whole joint session, but there will have to be things certified then by the Congress, and then it could get interesting after that. And then the inauguration on the 20th. Now, the courts could step in at any time. The Supreme Court probably would and could. But I just want to step back for a minute and talk about this election more so in relation to the real fraud that has existed, the real corruption that is there. Now, this is an election that most people recognize has been stolen. Most people would agree that it has. There's all kinds of irregularities or illegal things that have been done. And that's where the case is made. And if judges have the courage, and if the Supreme Court takes it up, the law should be pretty clear, at least in some states more than others maybe, but it should be pretty clear. And legislators who choose the electors in these states should be pretty clear of the things that have been presented that most media hasn't covered it, but some media has. And if you've listened to any of the hearings, you may be shocked. 5,000 and some affidavits, sworn people who get felonies if they're lying, of things that they observed, eyewitness testimonies, hundreds of people that have given interviews, that have been in hearings in each of the swing states. I mean, there's so much you could talk about, and I've got things I want to talk about. I'd like to tie it into Scripture some. I've got some things in Scripture that I want to deal with prophetically and get into, and might just do that as we head toward the end of the year. But I wanted to talk about this real fraud, because it really is. I mean, you talk about people wearing masks on Halloween and the masks that exist because of the COVID thing. Well, we got masks and fraud and people doing things at night and so many other things that have taken place. Now, I just thought about this, and I sat down and I just made a list of things that happened that were irregularities. There's more detailed specifics of things, but just think about it in these 10 things that I mentioned that are examples of it, and there's plenty of testimony to it. Voter suppression through fear with COVID. I mean, just telling people it's too dangerous, and it makes it less likely sometimes they'll get out and vote. Of course, the mail-in ballots were suggested, but there was just voter suppression that existed even by media, and that's really leads into the second thing I think that's there, the media bias. That just didn't cover stories that were negative toward any left-leaning people. That didn't cover that covered stories that were negative toward Trump. And there's statistics that show that that's very clear overall bias. I mean, 90-some% I think it is a negative toward Trump by most media. All right, you have big tech companies that are suppressing certain stories, that shadow ban certain things that are out there. They delete certain tweets or something about something that's happened. They've done that with Trump. They've done it with other leaders and people. They've done it in many different ways. You have that's why Facebook and Twitter and people from those companies were called into Congress to be questioned over some of this stuff. So you've got that big tech company censoring that's gone on too. Now that leads to really the real big thing that caused this. Who knows how this COVID thing has really affected everything. I mean, it's really the main reason why there wasn't a landslide for Trump. The way the economy was going and things were going well, and then this hit, and it really has an effect on people and has killed people the way it has. And we now know it's been known from like the Red Cross has tested blood and showed that there's antibodies even back in December for the coronavirus, and so it was here in the U.S. Even in December, which makes sense with things that I have known about people suffering with things unknown and the flu and it wasn't the flu that they had, and so it probably came through in December even more with most people. But anyway, COVID is probably something that was hatched in a lab in China and maybe even released that way. They fed the story about it coming from Pangloid and jumping over into humans, but I don't think that wet market is where it probably came from. But regardless, it's a terrible disease and it's impacted a lot of people, and maybe we'll have this vaccine that helps, maybe it won't. We don't know exactly. It's supposed to be very effective, but who do you believe anymore? It's hard to trust any source of news and media, so you've got to be really smart. You've got to really think. And these mail-in ballots that came because of COVID, though, are really where the fraud has come into it because of how it can be so easily corrupted. And many people, experts have said this is a recipe for corruption. And it certainly has been. I mean, just look at it related to mail-in ballots. You have the ballots that were sent out that were unsolicited. People didn't request them, but they still sent it out to the voter lists. That's not the way it's supposed to work. You have places where more people voted than are registered to vote. I think in Michigan there were examples like that. You have illegal votes from people who are non-residents. Maybe they moved. They're still on the rolls. They get a ballot or it goes somewhere and somebody uses it maybe. You have non-residents voting. And you have the non-citizens voting. Also, people who are illegal in this country, maybe even felons voting. You have plenty of examples of dead people voting. I've seen people put names in from all these swing states, and it shows that they asked for a ballot and they voted, and they're dead. And the record shows they're dead. So that's obvious problems, and there are hundreds and thousands even that have happened in some places. I think Nevada's real bad with some things like that too. Homeless people voting, people in nursing homes, like 25,000 ballots requested from nursing home residents on the same day. I mean, there was fraud going on everywhere. But it was particularly going on in the swing states. And you know it because of how things happened. I mean, look at how it happened with the drop boxes for the ballots, and not even drop boxes that were monitored and observed by people as to who would drop them in and whether a big dump would go in to those drop boxes. But what about those unverified ballots that came in maybe through a drop box or whatever however they showed up through the mail or whatever, that they weren't verified because of Republicans being pushed out, windows being boarded, as they were in Michigan, not allowed to come in Pennsylvania, and a Supreme Court justice had to get involved to even say you got to separate the ballots, segregate them. But you had these different ballots come in from these drop boxes, and you had the ballots. I guess I had number 6B, ballots dumped in the middle of the night. I mean, they stopped counting the votes. Now, there's another reason I'll mention as for that too, but these ballots dumped in the middle of the night, hundreds and thousands of ballots dumped in the middle of the night that actually changed the vote in Michigan, that changed it in Pennsylvania, that was changing it more and more as these came in and were tallied in Georgia. I mean, this is crazy what happened. The fraud that existed, especially in the big cities, as more and more people have come out and testified too. You had examples of ballots being run through multiple times. An eyewitness, maybe it was in Arizona, I think, but an eyewitness saw that a ballot had been put in for Biden 10 times and Trump only once. Counting ballots multiple times like that. You know, that's kind of how they're doing some of the COVID tests. A person gets a test, they test positive, they hope they're over it in a few days, they get another test, they're still positive, so they wait another couple days, that still test positive, even if the tests are reliable or how they're doing it. I mean, you don't know exactly, so that counts as 3, and then they test negative, and so it's over. But hey, you have numbers being run up with the COVID test in order to control things still, and to get more money to hospitals or places that are doing the testing and things, and that's filled with corruption as well and fraud as well, and wow, how they're even keeping children from going to school when you don't have them dying, when you basically have nobody under 70 at real risk of dying, and mostly older people are the ones that are more at risk, and even then it's not near as bad as some other diseases that have been out. So what we've done is not warranted. What we've done is hurting our children. What we've done is hurting our whole society. Our economy is ruining people's lives who have businesses all over the country. And we've got to stop it. We've got to get some sense and reason, but it's all tied to this election and the fraud that was being committed, and they don't care. There are people that just don't care about freedom. They don't care about this country. They want to control things and change things radical way, the way that some countries have done in a revolution and things, and have certain people in power. But the ballots run through multiple times was number 7 I had. You had shenanigans going on in the actual polling places. Like I believe it was in Arizona, some county there, where they gave markers to people who were registered Republicans, so their votes wouldn't count. And they gave the pins to the Biden people so their votes would. And so that's been testified as to a problem in places. You had I have number 9 being backdated ballots. You have in Pennsylvania in particular, the governor had said, oh, you can go have up to 3 days after, but the state legislator had said no, it has to be in by the end of November 3rd, but yet they allowed for more. And then you have ballots from New York State. A truck driver testifying that he drove a tractor trailer of ballots to Pennsylvania overnight. And so you have these ballots, hundreds of thousands that are counted that shouldn't be counted, and that pushed it over into Biden's category there in Pennsylvania. And you have testimony of people saying that they were ordered to backdate it to the 3rd, when it wasn't, ballots that had come in the 4th. I mean, so fraud. All this is fraud. There are a bunch of people involved in it. There are people that should go to jail for this. I mean, you would go to jail for a lot less. There's a lot of people that should go to jail, that should be fined, that should have consequences for this. We need justice in these things. And whether you're Democrat or Republican or whatever you believe, you should want a free and fair election. You should want to know, to have more certainty that what happened and there wasn't fraud, that it wasn't stolen, that there wasn't deceit. You want it to be out in the open. And then the 10th thing, which news just broke about how a judge in Michigan was allowing an audit of the Dominion software that was known in one county there in Michigan to have switched suddenly 6,000 votes to Biden, but it was caught and it was put back to Trump. It was Trump votes switched to Biden, and yet there's been people testifying that there's an algorithm in the Dominion software that's controlled from other countries, and votes maybe even being counted in other countries, and man, the way things have gone with that, and Smartmatic technology, and what 28 states have Dominion software. So you've got this corruption in all of the software stuff, and I think Sidney Powell is the main person doing a lot of investigation, and there's a lot of problems with that even switched votes, and hopefully we'll see an audit. There's no reason why we can't know this, but there's no reason why they should have stopped counting that night, except that there was fraud being committed. They needed to know how many votes they needed to manufacture or get them in to make it look like it wasn't an issue. They used COVID as an excuse, and they did all these things in order to try to steal this election to get into power so they can change the country and take away freedoms more than they even have through pushing the COVID narrative more than it should be. Now, there's a lot more specifics. Maybe you know of other specifics. You've heard of specific details of things that were fraudulent. But friend, we need to be a country that goes back toward truth, that goes toward justice. We need to stop the lying that has occurred, that people regularly do and think nothing of it. There's no such thing as a little white lie versus a big lie. Yeah, some lies carry more consequences, but you need to be people of truth. God expects you to be people of truth. He expects you to be someone who is going to be a person of your word. I mean, I've done videos that talk about that. You have that. We have to have a fair election. And friend, I hope you pray, and I hope you're praying about this, because I like a verse like Psalm 11:7, which says, "The Lord is righteous. He loves righteousness, and His countenance beholds the upright." God hates lying. Proverbs 6, he says, "These 6 things the Lord hate. Even 7 are an abomination unto Him. A proud look, a lying tongue, hands that shed innocent blood." How about that? Abortion, that applies there. A heart that devises wicked imagination. Feet that are swift in running to mischief. A false witness that speaks lies, and he who sows discord among the brethren. 2 of those 7 things mentioned there involve lying. I just think that we have to see people that know God need to stand up. If you know God and you know Jesus Christ, you need to stand for truth. You don't need to be a person who lies. You don't need to excuse yourself with lying. You need to be praying for justice, that righteousness would prevail, that truth would. And even if you don't claim that, you ought to be a person who expects that this country be legitimate in what it does and in its elections, and not be fraudulent. So friend, this is real fraud. And it's time we really wake up and we really understand, because if we don't get this straight, we may never have confidence in our country again. If we don't get it straight now, if we don't have this cleared up, if there's not legal consequences that are given to people who have been fraudulent, who have done these things that have been testified that they've done, that the eyewitness testimony to these things all over the country, but particularly in these swing states. Now, if Donald Trump didn't win the election, then fine, I would be satisfied. But the fraud shows that Biden didn't win, that they made him win by the fraud. They made him win by doing illegal things, the same way they want illegal people into the country. They didn't care about the truth. They didn't care about what is right and what is legal. Now, we could talk about the difference between legal and right, but you're not justified in doing wrong. There's some justification. Maybe this would be a good video on civil disobedience to things that are not right that a government tells you. But even these orders by governors everywhere, they're not law. In fact, the Supreme Court has upheld the right of religious freedom for churches to meet. And we see in California, for instance, where the lockdowns, where they're arresting people, and the lockdowns are horrible, that Pastor John MacArthur there, 7,000 people or so in his church is still meeting, still don't have an outbreak of COVID there. Even the health department says no outbreak. So, and churches should be meeting. Churches shouldn't shut down. We should have children's ministries. We should have children in school. There's no reason to do it except for the political reasons and the fraud that's being committed and the fear that they put in so many people. I've said from the beginning here, we don't need to be afraid. I've had plenty of videos that talk about that. We don't need to be afraid. We need to be bold. We need to stand for truth, and we need to pray that truth prevails here and justice prevails. Because, friend, if you want to be free, and you could look at my poem that I wrote about being free and published here around the 4th of July. But if you want to be free, then you had better pray, and you had better do what you can to act, and you better hope that there is not the wrong people that are in power, and that there's no checks and balances for them, because if it were to go that way, you may never recognize this country again. So friend, there's a lot to pray about. I hope this video was informative and challenging to you. Like the video, share it with other people, subscribe to my channel, and be ready for some other things where I get more into the Bible and talk about prophecy, what is true, whether this is the last days or not, what some people say. A lot of people have confusion there too, just as there's a lot of confusion. We don't need fraud, we need truth. We need righteousness. Righteousness, Proverbs says, exalts a nation, but sin is a reproach to any people. I think that's Proverbs 14:34. So pray about this. Make sure you aren't fraudulent. Make sure you keep your word. And let's see what happens from now until the 20th and even beyond with this whole situation.